The dawn that crept into the Red Keep came thin as milk and cold as the ocean that gnawed the cliffs below. In that pale light, Brienne of Tarth stood, still as a carved figure, the white of her cloak falling from her shoulders in quiet folds, her hand resting on the pommel of the sword Jaime Lannister had given her. She had not worn the white before this week, and still it sat upon her as an oath made flesh, heavier than steel, brighter than any banner she had ever followed. It threw her back upon every promise she had made and kept, and upon the one she had not saved, the man who had taken her last oath as a knight and placed it on her shoulders with a smile that had not reached his eyes. The old stones of Maegor's holdfast kept the damp of night even at midday. At dawn they hoarded darkness like misers. A boy with a coal scuttle passed and dipped his head, too afraid of the white cloak to glance properly at her. Somewhere below, the kitchens were stirring, with the measured clang of ladles, the muffled murmur of cooks. A gull's cry snapped off by the parapet as if the city were swallowing sound as it always swallowed grief and blood and laughter. Brienne knew the city's temper the way a warrior knows a battlefield's slope. It could turn treacherous in a breath, and it remembered everything. "Sir." Podrick stopped 2 paces away, breath steaming and the cold hair unruly beneath his helm. He was a knight now, and wore his newness like a stain he had not managed to scrub off. His armor still creaked. His steps still tried to be light when they should be sure. He had the white cloak too, and the sight of him in it sent a strange ache through Brienne's chest. "You are early," she said. "You are earlier." His mouth tugged, not quite a smile. Then, as if remembering himself, he added, "The Hand has called for the King's Guard to attend the throne room at first bell. The Hand always calls." She looked beyond him to the city. The first smoke was rising. The river's ribbon had yet the color of iron. "We will attend." They made their way across the inner yard. The King's Guard had been 7 once. They were 5 now, with names that were still learning to carry the weight of their posts. Sir Balon of Fairmarket, quiet and broad-shouldered, whose scars had been earned guarding bread instead of princes during the winter's leanest months. Sir Loras Tyrell's cousin had died in the sack. The Flower Knight's brightness was a tale gone sour in a city that had run out of sweetness long ago. Sir Harl, a reachman whose wrists trembled until he took a sword in hand. Only then did his tremor still, and with a blade he was good as a prayer. Sir Podrick, loyal as a hound and twice as brave, if not the most graceful. And Brienne, who had been mocked as the Maid of Tarth, and now wore the white Lord Commander of the King's Guard by decree of a king whose eyes were sometimes old as the weirwoods and sometimes the eyes of a boy staring across a river at a fallen bridge. The throne room's long door sat half open, as if daring a gust of wind to make sport of the hinges. Inside, the hall was colder despite the braziers. Light slid off the iron of the throne and pooled like dull water in the corners. Tyrion Lannister stood at the foot of the steps in a doublet the color of wine lees, a scroll in one hand and a cup of something steaming in the other. His face was thinner than it had been when she had seen him last in the north, and his hair more gray than gold. Beside him, Davos Seaworth warmed his hands on the brazier's edge, turning to nod when Brienne entered. Samwell Tarly, who had somehow managed to put on the Grand Maester's collar without losing the honest worry of a boy, stood with ink blotting the side of his thumb and a sheaf of parchment tucked under his arm. Bronn lounged in a chair as if the presence of dragons had taught him nothing about fear. He wore silk that wanted to call itself velvet and rings that were ready to be pawned if need drove him. On the throne, Bran listened to the small sounds the hall made. He had never liked the clamor of the crown. The iron behind him made no noise now, but the ghosts of it filled any silence longer than a breath. He looked at Brienne for a moment as she and her men took their places, and there was between them the unspoken understanding of 2 people who had seen fate in the face and recognized it without ornament. "My Lord Hand," Brienne said. "Sir," Tyrion returned. "It heartens me to see white cloaks before morning bread. It tells me my summons reached ears untroubled by sleep." Bronn chuckled. "The city didn't sleep. Someone forgot to tell the bakers the war ended." "We forget to pay them, the war returns," Davos said gruffly. Sam lifted his parchments. "There's been a matter," he said, and his voice did that thing it did when he feared he would be in the way, as if apologizing to the air. 2 silent sisters were found last night in the ruins of the Great Septi, in the East Transept that did not completely collapse. They had been tending stray bones, as they call it. One fell from a broken arch. The other, he swallowed. The other was strangled. The words seemed to make the hall colder. Brienne felt her palm slide on the leather of her glove. She had not thought to dry it when she came in. "Thieves," Bronn said. "The sisters carry purses. Quiet women, bones and purses. If I were a thief, I would choose the quiet. They carry coppers for alms, not gold," Davos said. "And the quiet places draw more dangerous men than thieves." Tyrion lifted the cloth that lay on the plinth beside him. Under it lay something small. "This was found near the body, Sam." Sam held the thing up between 2 fingers. It was an enamel pin shaped like a moth, wings outspread, made in a plain hand and no stranger to wear. Its body was a pearl. Brienne had seen a pearl like that once in Renly's camp, set in a brooch that had held a green cloak. The memory knifed her and passed. She stepped closer. "A moth," she said. Tyrion nodded. "The City Watch says it means nothing and will say the same until it means too much. The moth is not the lion or the kraken nor the sun. It is the small thing that eats cloth in the dark." Bronn sniffed. "Best not to make poetry before breakfast." Sam coughed. "There were other things." He shuffled his parchment as if it might hide the world. "In the vaults beneath the Sept's east nave, there was a cache that by ancient writ belonged to the faith. Porbox coin, cloth for winding shrouds, candles. It's all gone. The sisters say the vault was cleared 2 nights ago by men with the watch sigils on their sleeves. Now that," Davos said, "is the sort of hunger that eats more than cloth." Brienne looked to the king. Bran's face gave nothing to anyone who did not know what to look for. His eyes had the stillness of deep water. "Find the rot," he said. The words weighed nothing and moved everything. After the council was dismissed, Brienne walked the city. She took Podrick and Sir Balon and left the other 2 to mind the throne. It was a thing a Lord Commander could do and ought to do. Kings were not protected by stone alone, and men were not protected by steel alone. Sometimes what kept the blades outside, and the truth inside, was the sight of a white cloak in a place it had no reason to be. They went first to the Sept's ruins. Time had gnawed at the blistered edges. Fire had it, then rain and wind. And now the slow, patient work of moss made a claim on what had once had music. The East Transept was a skeleton with 1 arm, ribs laid open to the sky. Between the fallen stones had grown a tangle of weeds so green they hurt the eye. 2 women from the Order of the Silent Sisters knelt with their baskets, faces wimpled and hands steady. Beside a broken arch, a stain was turning to rust in the dirt. "Here?" Podrick asked. Brienne knelt. The earth held the marks of a struggle, but only so much survived the trampling feet of a city that had made a pilgrimage to destruction and returned to pick through the relics. Near the stain, a thread of white cloth caught on a skew of stone. She teased it free with a fingernail and rolled it between her fingers. Wool, coarse, unbleached. Not a mark of a moth to be seen, but moths left character and not sign. She turned to the sisters. Who saw them last? The nearer of the 2 lifted a gaze. The sisters did not speak by tradition when doing their work. But when they needed to, they could choose words like coins and spend them grudgingly. "A boy," the sister said softly. "Ratcatcher. The city has one still. Maegor's rats need catching. He brings us news of bones." She glanced aside. Tom O'Tunnel's, they call him." "Where?" Brienne asked. The sister lifted a hand to point, and it might as well have been to the hole of the hill beneath the Red Keep, to the winding veins that ran beneath it like old secrets. It was near enough. Tom O'Tunnel's became a breadcrumb in a forest. They asked in the markets. They asked at the mouth of the Blackwater. where the river gave up rats with the tide and took others with it. They asked among the washerwomen, and at the door of an alehouse where the gold cloaks took their breakfast. The watch had a captain with eyes like eels. He smiled too much and none at all. He spoke to Brienne with the politeness that grows where fear and contempt keep their lines. He knew nothing of sisters or moths, and his ignorance had the smell of last night's wine about it. They found Tom at dusk, as the light died in an alley behind the fish market where the gutters ran silver and the air was a wound of salt and rot. He was 12, or he had been 12 long enough to forget counting. His hair was a mistake the winter had not yet corrected. He had the look of a boy whose bones had decided to outrun his flesh. Brienne crouched to put her face level with his. The white cloak fell forward as if to shelter him, and she saw him see that and decide it was a kindness he could not trust. She had learned long ago that small folk saw the armor first and the person last, if ever. "I am Brienne," she said, "of Tarth, Lord Commander of the King's Guard." She did not add that names were not coin with which to purchase help in this part of the city. She had never liked boasting, and in any case she did not know her name's price here. "Tom," he said warily. He kept his distance as if the white might bite like lime. "You saw the sisters last night." He nodded once, and ducked as if anticipating a cuff, a habit that told its own story. "What did you see?" He shifted a foot. His bare toes were as nimble as fingers. "Two cloaks with scales under," he said at last. "Gold? Not bright mud gold. They had a lantern that didn't swing when the wind came. Took all the stuff from the dead house and said the watch would keep it safe. The tall one carried a little chest on his shoulder like it was a feather, and the other kept staring up like he could see through the stones." "Watchman," Podrick muttered. "How long have you lived under the hill?" Brienne asked the boy. He looked at the ground, and then at her sword, and then at the ground again. "All the time," he said. "Rats go where they go. People go where they must." She put 2 coppers in his hand, and they looked like moons in a sky that had never shown him stars. "If you see a moth," she said, "tell the sisters. Tell them to send for Brienne." She paused. "Keep 1 copper. Take the other to a baker who will give you bread late when it is old. That's when he won't take both." Tom's mouth betrayed him with a smile that flashed like a fish's belly. "Bread's bread," he said. That night she went through the watch's rosters with Sam until candle grease slicked the table. The watch had 7 companies of 100 each on paper, and 4 companies of whatever men could be dragged from alehouses in truth. Their pay was late, and their loyalty was earlier to anyone with a purse. The captain on duty at the Quill and Tankard Alley, the one whose eyes had been eels, was named Hardwick. He had been promoted 2 months earlier after his predecessor fell from a wall. Falling from walls was becoming a frequent cause of death among captains of the watch. "Braun is master of coin," Brienne said, tapping the parchment. "The coin does not arrive at the watch." "Braun is lord of the reach and coin at once," Sam said, wincing as if the words themselves chafed. "He has fields to put to right. The watch can go a week without pay in a way a harvest cannot." "The watch are harvest," Brienne said. "If you grow bribe in these fields, you will reap riot." When first light came again, the bell tolled once and twice, and then a 3rd time for trouble. A runner with a black eye and a mouthful of blood came up the tower stairs like a hunted rabbit. "The hand!" he gasped, falling to one knee. They tried to put death in his cup. They reached the solar before the guards had their wits. Tyrion sat at the table with the steam of his morning wine curling like a breath from a sleeping dog. He looked down at the cup the way an old mercenary looks down at a trap he has seen before, and sprung anyway. On the table beside it, a smear of something darker than wine showed on the wood, nearly black. Bronn stood with one hand on his dagger, which was a thing a lord ought not to do in a king's castle. Davos had his hand around the wine flagon. His knuckles were white. "It was not meant for me," Tyrion said absently when he saw Brienne, "which is a pity. I had begun to hope the god's sense of humor would turn charitable." "Who?" Brienne asked. Bronn grunted. The delectable answer to the only useful question. Sam bent over the stain, sniffed, sneezed, and tipped the cup carefully into the light. A film swam on the surface. Strangler, he said, voice thin. The tears of Lys are a cousin of them. I think someone intended to make a lesson of it. For who? Davos asked. Tyrion looked at the window. The boy who pours my wine. He called. They brought the cupbearer in. He could not have seen 14 years yet. He had the sullen look of one who had learned early that obedience is not the same as being unseen. He trembled and tried to stop trembling and trembled more for trying. What is your name? Brienne asked. Clem, he whispered. Clem, Tyrion said kindly. This is the part where I make a joke so you think I am not going to have you thrown in the black cells. And then I tell you that I am not going to have you thrown in the black cells. Only one of those is untrue. None. The boy's mouth did a strange thing as if it wanted to laugh and could not remember how. He swallowed. I didn't pour it. I mean, I poured it, but not the poison. I swear it. He looked at Brienne with sudden, desperate clarity. I didn't do it. I didn't. She remembered a room lit by candles and shadows. A boy at Harrenhal whose crimes had been his face and his hunger. She remembered the taste of every lie she had chosen to believe, and every truth she had feared. Who gave you the cup? She asked. Sir Hardwick. The captain. Clem's breath came sharp as if he had to bite it. He said the hand would be thirsty because his words are like ash in his mouth and he needs wet. He laughed. I carry wine. It's what I do. If I don't, they beat me, and if I do, they don't notice me. And that's better. Bronn made a low noise like a man amused by a joke made in a foreign tongue. Where is Hardwick now? Brienne asked. The boy lifted a shaking hand toward the door. Hardwick stood in it, helm and crook of his arm, eyes sliding. Here, he said. To explain to the hand that boys are boys and cups are cups, and to ask for a cup myself to prove it. He smiled, and it was a blade's edge, a thin thing with old rust on it. Brienne moved before she thought. Oathkeeper came free in a sound that always spoke to her spine. She set the bare point at Hardwick's throat with the exact distance and measure any training yard in the Stormlands had taught, and the old memories of boys who had grinned and murmured cow jokes collapsed into silence. The room went still, except for the trembling of Clem. Do not try me, Brienne said. Hardwick lifted both hands as if she had asked for a dance. No need for that, he said. I came to speak, not to cut my own throat on your iron. He looked at Tyrion. My lord hand, word has it you like to hear both sides before you choose which to drink. I prefer to start with the side that did not add Strangler to my cup, Tyrion said. I'll leave then, Bronn murmured, and Davos' mouth twitched despite himself. Hardwick shrugged with a bounce of plate that made him seem smaller inside it. Someone told my boys last night to collect what is owed to the watch. Someone else told them to bring it to the vault beneath the sept. Someone else again told them to bring it out again. If that seems circular, it is because the city is a wheel, and we are spokes. And when the wheel turns, spokes break. I am not a friend to poison. When I kill a man, my lord, he has the decent chance to see the blade coming and think of his mother. No. You would have us believe that your men wore scales and stole the faith psalms at someone's bidding that was not your own, Brienne said. If they wore scales, they should be flogged for borrowing without leave, Hardwick said blandly. But it is true as piss that the watch was told to move a chest of coins. 3 such chests. And it is true that the watch was told to stand away this morning while a boy carried a cup. I'd not quibble over either, since I prefer my skin and my post. But the thing about poison, sir, is that it turns friends into corpses faster than swords, and I like my men breathing. If you wish to cut my throat, Lord Commander, make it a clean cut and put my name in the white book with a note that says I told you the truth. He lifted his chin. Or we can go find the moth together. Brienne studied him. Many men lied. Fewer lied while offering their own necks. He was a creature of the city, which meant he was a creature of need. He would sell, and he would barter, and he would run. But sometimes such men told truths to buy bigger lies later. She took a breath and lowered the point of Oathkeeper until it no longer threatened to write a new line in that great stubborn book. "Bring me your men who moved the chests," she said, "and the names of the men who told them. If you do not have names, bring me the faces, and I will find the names." Hardwick looked disappointed that she had not killed him. "Faces I have," he said. "Names I collect and they run like water through a cracked cup, but I'll do what I can. For the king. For the people who die when we drink what the city gives us," Brienne said. Hardwick saluted in a way that made mockery of salutes, and left. "What do moths eat when they chew the cloth?" Davos asked after a moment. "And the woman who wore it is not there to slap them away." "Anything soft," Tyrion said. Bronn kicked his chair back on two legs, and smiled at Brienne. "You've got the feel of it. Cut heads, count coins, follow boys named Tom, break a captain, make a captain. It could be a song. Septon Lem used to play something like it on a lute. Only in his song, there were more jugs and fewer moths." "You have a name," Brienne said to Bronn, not a question. "I always have a name," Bronn said. "These days I have a title too. Lord of the Reach, master of what's left of the coin. If your moths roost in my granaries, I'll smoke them out with smoke, not honor." His eyes hardened then for a sliver of a moment that might almost be called sincerity. "Watch yourself, Tarth. You can fight 100 men in a yard and break all their arms, and it won't help you when someone drops a cobblestone behind you on a dark stair. The city has 1,000 hands," Davos said quietly. "Most of them empty. They reach for what they can. Sometimes they pick up stones. Hey, Running. Bow." That night, Brienne wrote in the White Book. The ink took the parchment like rain taking dust, impatient and eager. She wrote of Jaime Lannister in a hand that betrayed her large fingers, and the way the quill always felt like a toy she feared breaking. She wrote the things she had wished someone would write for her had she not lived to write it. She wrote, "He knighted Brienne of Tarth before the living. He kept a vow when it could have been an excuse. He died with a truth in his mouth, though it broke him." Then, while the ink was still wet, she remembered the first time she had seen him in a tub with the water cloudy and his body scarred, and his mouth full of bitter pride, and she set down the quill and drew her thumb across the words to smudge them a little, as if sorrow were wind in the hall. Podrick knocked and entered, careful not to look at the book. "Sir," he said, "Hardwick sent the boys." Hardwick had not sent boys. He would not waste his coin that way. He had sent men whose faces could not decide if they were tired or sly. They stood in the hall outside the book room with hands dangling as if to show they were empty and could not harm. Brienne took them one by one into a small antechamber with a bench and a jug of water and sunlight that had no warmth to it. She asked simple questions and watched where their eyes went when answers stalled. Two looked to the floor, one to the window, and one to the jug. The man who looked at the jug finally said, "Saw her." He meant the moth. Men do not say moths as women might. For men they are always heard because of the quiet way they work and the destruction they leave in their soft path. Brienne asked. "The woman in the red and moths on the hem," he said, massaging his wrist as if words chafed him. "She walks like she has never fallen. They say she was once the Whisperer's hands," by which he meant Varys. "They say she keeps his birds in a cage and feeds them honey and secrets, and lets them out one by one to drop crumbs where she wants them." "And where does she want them? In halls? In beds? In laps?" He looked away. "You did not hear it from me." "I heard it from you," Brienne said. She stood. "Now you will do something that will keep you breathing. You will take me to where you saw her." Which is how she came to be in a place called the Moth Hall that was not a hall at all but a long, low house near the Street of Silk, where the windows were narrow and the doorset was powdered with something sweet that made the nose itch. Inside there were girls who were not girls and women who were, and boys who had eyes like cups turned upside down, and a music that called itself music even in the presence of true pain. It was not a brothel, though some of the men inside seemed to think it ought to be. It was a place for talk that wandered inside of talk, for men who had run out of ears to tell their stories to and needed new ones. and for women who knew that ears could be a kind of purse. Brienne pushed through that softness like a ship through weed. Her armor made a sound that argued with the harps. Men laughed when they saw the white cloak and then remembered themselves, and then forgot again and laughed a second time. She had learned long ago to let the laughter slide off her. It did not hit bone the way it once had. The woman in red was at the far end, feet bare and hair braided with moth-shaped pins such as the one that had been found by the sisters. She moved with the slow, dangerous grace of a snake that has no need to hurry. When she turned her head, there was nothing in her face that told you how old she was. She could have been 20 or 50. She held a fan that made its own wind, and she smiled at Brienne, the way a fire smiles at dry wood. "You wear 2 cloaks," she said. Her voice had been taught to make men listen, and women too, if they had not learned the trick of not listening. The white and the memory. "Come with me," Brienne said. "That would require me to grow wings or you to cut mine," the woman said, displaying her fan. Moths had been stitched into the silk, tiny bodies of pearl, wings pale. "And I lose nothing I do not wish to lose. It is the first rule of my trade." "No, Chardonnay. What trade is that?" Podrick asked sharply at Brienne's shoulder. "Listening," the woman said. "And sewing, and unpicking what others have sown." "Who are you?" Brienne asked. "You would prefer a name," the woman said. "Names make boxes, and boxes make people easier to stack." She canted her head. "Some call me Camel. I imported cinnamon before the war, when clever men imported spices and wise women imported peace. Now I import whatever the city can afford to pay for. Secrets are cheap and dear at once. A good one can feed a house for a year." "Then you put Strangler in the Hand's cup," Podrick blurted. Camel laughed gently, as if at a child who had said something charming and wrong. "My sweet knight," she said not unkindly, "if I wished to put the Hand to death, I would not do it with Strangler. I would do it with bread. No one suspects bread." Brienne took a step forward. The room shifted in the way rooms do when power moves inside them. Men put down cups. A harp string broke. Somewhere in the back, a boy began to cough and could not stop. "I am not here to fence with words," Brienne said. "Come with me. If you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to fear from the truth under the Red Keep stones. If you do, better to fear it now than later." Camel's smile thinned. "Do not mistake me," she said. "I have less to fear than you might wish. But neither have I so little that I will go walking into the mouth of your holdfast because the white cloak is clean. I am not so poor in sense." "Then I will come again," Brienne said. "And again, and I will bring less patience each time." "You have as much patience as a man has sense," Camel said, amused. "But come, bring your sword. Bring your boys. Bring your bread, since you think yourself generous. I will tell you something for nothing as an act of piety, since the sisters' copper was taken. If you wish to find the men who took it, look for where the moths have eaten a hole and something brighter shows beneath. That is where the clean cloth was laid over rot. The watch's captain is not your enemy. He's a hinge. Your enemy opens doors without touching them." "Mine." Back in the keep, Tyrion listened, turning his cup slowly as if hunting for poison that would not be there because they had already found it once. "You cannot arrest everyone who speaks like a riddle," he said. "If you could, the city would be blessedly quiet. But be careful if you choose to ignore them. Riddles are a form of debt in this place. If you do not pay with attention, you will pay later with grief." Davos looked at Brienne. "This Camel," he said. "She is not wrong about bread." "We are not starving," Tyrion said. "Not yet," Davos said. "But the ships are late and the coin is slow. Bronn has men ringing the reach so that bread may come this way rather than go out to Essos at a better price. He can ring but not make the harvest a summer's harvest." "Nah, Benedon, Disha." Isaac, a clerk too pale from the tower's shadows, came stumbling in with a slate. "By your leave," he panted. "A bread riot on Ragpicker's Wind. Baker beat a man with a peel. 10 men answered with stones. Stones, Davos murmured again, as if he had planted them himself and knew which way their roots grew. Take the watch, Brienne said to Podrick. Take Sir Balon. Put down the riot. Do not break heads unless you must. But take the peel away and hang it on the door of the bakery with the baker's name carved on it, so that he might learn the cost of a man's skull. Day. And you? Podrick asked. Maegor's tunnels, she said. If the city is a wheel, the wheelwright left a blueprint. The Faith's vault, the watch that went in and out, the moths. They all know the old ways under the stones. I have to know them too. She looked at Davos. Sailors are good with dark places. Will you walk with me? Davos' mouth tugged. I prefer a deck, he said. But I have been below once or twice. They took lanterns and rope and 3 men from the barracks who had not had time to learn fear and left before they could. The tunnels breathed old air. They took them in and gave back echoes. Davos muttered a prayer under his breath, to a god he had learned to fear less than men. Brienne counted the paces, as if the stones had been measure marks in a book. They found the place where fixed boards had scuffed, new marks on old wood, and where a lantern's soot had smeared the ceiling. They found farther in, a place where someone had made a camp and left hurriedly, bread crusts and a broken comb, a boot with the sole torn free, and a ledger bound in cracked leather. Tyrion would have smiled to see it. Brienne leafed through it as if it might bite. Inside were columns of numbers and a symbol inked at the top of each page. Not a moth, but a coin with a hole punched through it. It made a mouth of emptiness. It was a sign she did not know and did not care for. Coiners, Davos said, or something worse. A man who puts a hole in a coin says there's the king's face on one side and mine on the other, and you can see which is more important. Mine lets the coin be strung on a cord and hidden. Smugglers like such tricks. No, hold fast, one of the guards called from ahead. There's a door. Maegor's doors never opened for those who wanted them most. This one did, after a time and a bruised shoulder and a patience Brienne had not known she had until the last years of war forced it upon her. Behind it was a chamber with a ceiling low enough to make her bow her head. In the center of the room, a table held a map of the city with lines drawn in red that ran like veins from the river to the hill, from the hill to the sept, from the sept to the granaries, from the granaries to the street of silk. At the corner lay 3 moth pins like the one in Sam's hand and a ring set with a pearl the color of old milk. Not Davos said softly, but someone who learned his game. On the wall, words had been chalked in a hand that grew bolder as it went, as if the writer's confidence had mounted with his letters. Bread, watch, watch, wine, dine, recall, work, work, move, under and through. The last line was a name, Miriel. Next to it, someone had drawn a little crown and a moth on top of it, as if to say, queens of things that rot be queens just the same. Brienne leaned on her hands and looked down at the map. This was not a court of lions and stags. This was a court of bakers and rat catchers, of watchmen who looked at a coin and saw a chance to put meat in their children, of women like Camel who had learned that a secret could be a blade that never dulled. If she was to purge the court, she would not do it by cutting down lords on a dais. She would have to stand in flour and in darkness and make a law out of wheat and ink. Take the ledger to Sam, she said at last, straightening. Have him copy every number. We will find where holes have been punched in the king's face. She touched one of the moth pins, then took it. It felt like nothing at all in her palm, and it could murder a city if it wanted to. When she climbed back into daylight, the city was shouting. Podrick had done what he could at Ragpicker's Wind, and Sir Balon had been struck in the helm by a thrown stone hard enough to make him forget his daughter's name for a time. The baker stood in his doorway with tears in his eyes, and the bread peel hung above him like a gallows. The crowd roared and stilled and roared again. They were learning that justice could be a spectacle, and that it did not always require blood. Tyrion, when she came to him later, had bread under his nails. I cut loaves today, he said mildly. I considered it a lesson. The line between a riot and a feast is a handful of crumbs. Nanya. Kamel said bread is the true poison, Brienne said. Kamel is fond of words that can be true and untrue at once. Tyrion handed her a parchment. Sam has found something in your ledger, and in 2 others. The watch seized last night after Hardwick delivered his boys. There are payments from a company of factors called the Harbor Light, based in Lys, to a thing that calls itself the Protectorate of King's Landing. He shrugged. It is a pretty name for a gang of snatching hands. The coin goes into the watch and then comes out again into private purses. Some of it buys flour to be sold at high prices tomorrow. None. Gone. Who takes the coin out of the watch? Tyrion's mouth was clever and tired at once. Our friend with the eel eyes knows. He will not tell us yet. But the money goes into pockets that have not learned that pockets can be turned out. Here are 2 names, Sir Harrod Flay and Lady Anissa Fossaway. Brienne frowned. Fossaway, of a lesser branch, Tyrion said. The sort that lives in the city because it has nowhere else to squeeze. She owns 5 warehouses on the riverfront. He commands the 3rd company of the watch on paper, and does nothing in truth but play dice with men who talk too much. Nay. Arrest them, Brienne said. If you take them both at once, the others will run, Tyrion said. He put his cup down and looked at her. I am not your enemy, sir. I have cleaned a court before. The stench does not walk away because you open a window. It hides in the rafters and the dress sleeves. Take one, and watch the others come to see if they can help you or help themselves. Nay. She looked at him as she had once looked at a road that forked where the map said it did not. You love this city. He laughed softly, and it hurt. Do I? I have left it, and it has left me more times than a man can count without writing the number on a slate. But it is my home, and we are none of us free of the places that made us. Then help me. I am. He handed her a sealed letter. To the Lord of Storm's End. He has men. He has the look of a man who would rather lift a weight than count coin. Ask him for arms to stand behind you when you stand before the warehouses and the men who pull strings. If the city thinks your sword is the only sword that will kill if need be, it will see whether it can break you with numbers. If there are 6 swords, they will find their courage worn out. Nay, Panda. On the road to Storm's End, the air smelled of green growing. It had been long since Brienne rode through the Stormlands as a leader, and not a supplicant. The sky scudded above them with ragged cloud, and the sea kept to its old seething ways. Gendry met her in the yard with a hammer in his hand. He had been called Lord, and had learned to be one even if he didn't like it. The hammer had helped. He embraced Brienne in the Stormlands way, short and hard, so that neither might be thought soft. He read Tyrion's letter and laughed without mirth. King's Landing needs hammers again, he said. Not to break, but to set nails. I will lend you 4 companies, and I will go with them. This city was my birth, and my breaking. I will not have it break again if I can help it. He set the hammer against the forged stone with a sound like a pronouncement. I remember you on the road to the Twins, he added, unbidden. You were a mountain then. You are a mountain now with snow on you. Her laugh startled her. I am not so old as that. You are old enough to remember Renly and not laugh when others do, he said. They rode back with his men, Stormlanders with shoulders like lintels, and eyes that had seen enough rain to learn not to blink. The city watched them arrive and moved apart to let them through, the way a crowd moves around a cart carrying a corpse, with a respect that is half courtesy and half fear of contagion. The purge did not begin with a proclamation. It began with a door. The first warehouse belonged to Lady Anissa Fossaway. It sat with its back to the river and its face turned toward profit, windowless, smug. Brienne stood before it with 5 white cloaks and 4 companies of Stormlanders and Sir Hardwick's men arranged like a bad conscience just behind them. She raised her hand and Gendry raised his, and together they brought their fists down, and the battering ram came up to the door, and the door came down. Inside, sacks lay stacked and sealed with the king's seal and the Harbor Light Company's seal, and on 3 of them, A moth scratched in lightly with a pin, as if by a discontented clerk. There were also men with cudgels who had forgotten how to use them, and who remembered when they saw the Stormlanders. Brienne walked through the stacks and touched each seal, as if to make the king's face feel that she had seen it abused. Lady Anissa arrived in a litter with silk curtains, and stepped out of it as if the ground were not damp with river bleed. She had hair as carefully arranged as the ledgers in her office. She was the kind of woman who made men think of wine that had been watered so carefully that they forgot it had ever been wine. She smiled. "Sir," she said, "what a surprise." "A lawful search," Brienne said. "By the king's order, and the hands writ." Lady Anissa held her hands out with a little drop of her wrists that women practiced when they had been born to practice such things. "Search," she said. "You will find flour and barley and a little saffron I confess I brought in for a customer who likes his bread not unlike the hand's doublets. If you find anything else, you will have found a lie someone has told. People tell lies all the time in my line, sir. I cannot be held to account for what someone writes on a sack with a pin." Brienne looked at the sacks with the moths. "You underweight the loaves," she said quietly. "You charge twice the fair price and tell the men who cannot pay that if they do not pay today, they may pay tomorrow with the bodies of their sons, who are sturdy and can carry sacks for you." Lady Anissa's lashes fell and rose. "I have never said those words," she said. "You did not have to," Brienne said. "Your men said them. Words you do not say but permit are still yours." She stepped closer. "You will come to the Red Keep and answer questions in the presence of the king and the Grand Maester in the hand. You will bring your ledgers, and you will not burn any in the night because you will not go home. If you try to run, you will chase a carriage that is not there, and you will be tired." "My." Anissa's mouth tightened as if a seamstress had pulled a thread too hard. "You think to make a ruin of me with righteousness?" "Yes," Brienne said. "What then? You will hand my warehouses to men who cannot keep them. The city will starve." "The city is starving now," Brienne said. "It merely has not yet learned to name its hunger." They led her away, and Sir Harrod Flay came to them on the second day, not because they sought him, but because he walked into the keep to protest that his men had been insulted by the presence of Stormlanders in the city. Sloppiness is a cousin to guilt. He had both. They took him into a room and asked him the questions there, and when he lied, they took him into a smaller room and asked him the same questions again. He kept their eyes for a while and then lost them. In the end, he looked at the floor and wept. Brienne felt nothing but relief that it would be over soon. There were others. A clerk who had put holes through the king's face and threaded him on cords that ran to Lys. A baker who had weighed his flour well and taken less than he might when the hungry men came, who took the witness stand in the great hall and failed to find words for the simple thing he had done right, as if honesty were a thing that required apology because it had been in such short supply. A captain of a riverboat who had taken sacks meant for the orphan houses and delivered them to the palazzo of a Mirish factor because the money was better, and who tried to say that a man must feed his own children first. Davos spoke then and told him that he was right, and that to know fear for his children's hunger made him human, but that to answer that fear by starving other men's children made him less than the rat's tongue pursuit. The court fell silent then in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with shame. At nights, Brienne returned to the tunnels. She did not always know why she did it when daylight held enough trouble to feed 10 men. Perhaps it was because secrets pull like the tide, or because she felt that if she mapped the dark, she would be able to know the city the way she knew the weight of her sword. She found once, after 4 nights of walking, a room where children had slept, a neat line of pallets, and the remains of a hoop made of rush and a little stack of shells threaded on a string. Varys had kept his birds underground. Someone else had kept them here, and they had been moved or scattered. On the wall, a child had drawn a woman with a moth on her breast and a crown on her head the way children draw crowns, too big and full of triangles. The woman's smile was a straight line. The child had tried to draw hair and given up. "Camel," Podrick said softly when she showed him. He said the name as if it were made of sugar and ash both. It did not end with Camel. Such things never end with the one whose name is known. But it came to a head one dry morning when the sky was the color of old pewter, and the baker's lines were long, and the watch was there with their eel's eyes, and the Stormlanders were there with their hammers resting on their shoulders like peace in a church. There was to be a small council with all the usual faces and a new one, Lady Anissa's husband, who had returned from the arbor with claims of ignorance and a smile like a carved apple. Brienne took her place to the right of the throne with her cloak falling just so, and Podrick at her shoulder like the young tree behind a wall that will one day be the wall. Tyrion came in chewing something he pretended was bread. Bronn sauntered. Sam carried a roll of parchment that wanted to be many rolls. Davos held his hands behind his back to keep from gesturing at the ghosts of sails in a room where wind never came. Camel came in then, in red, a moth so bright at her throat that it seemed a mockery. She had come at Brienne's insistence, and because, Brienne suspected, she wished to see what truth would look like when shown in the light. She had not come to beg. She had come to see what could not be bought. "Begin," the king said, and his word rolled through the room and out again, and came back changed. Tyrion stood on the top step so that eyes did not look past him at the throne. He spoke of coin as if it were a creature that sometimes obeys and sometimes bites. He spoke of sacks and of seals, of moths, of rivermen, of the strangler in a cup, of how easily a city could be poisoned without a single drop of lice. He spoke of the holes that had been punched through the king's face, and he held up a string to show how many faces it would hold. Lady Anissa made her protests, her silks rustling like dry leaves. Her husband did what men do who have money and fearlessness both, he smiled. Sir Harrod begged and then grew angry, and then tried to grow brave and ended by being none of those things convincingly. Camel, when asked to speak, folded her fan and said, "I am not the court you seek. The court you seek has no fans and wears no red. The court you seek meets in kitchens and on riverboats. It uses me, as it uses the watch, as it uses the watch, as it uses the watch. If I fed a city once with secrets, I will not apologize for learning its appetites. But I will say this." She looked at Brienne. "You cannot purge a court and leave a vacuum unless you wish the city to fall into it. Fill it with something. With a way to choose the captains, with pay that comes, with flour that does not require a prayer. Moths do their work because closets are closed and winter is long." No. It was the closest thing to surrender Brienne would ever be offered in this place, and it did not feel like a surrender at all. It felt like a bargain made in the kind of light that shows a woman the lines at her eyes and makes her want to laugh or weep. Brienne turned to the king, then to the hall. "We will hang men who have earned ropes today," she said. But we will also change what the ropes hang from. Sir Hardwicke will be stripped and tried if it comes to him, but the Watch will choose their captains from a list made by the city's guilds and the king together, and captains will serve terms not thrice their age. The Watch's pay will be posted in the square at fishmongers, and if it is late 6 days, the hand will stand in the square and say why, and the names of the men who delayed it will be said aloud. The baker's weight will be kept by the priests who eat with the poor. The king's face will not be punched. Coin with holes will be melted and made again, while the men who melted it the first time watch them turn in the mold. And the moths? Bronn asked lazily. The moths will be let out into the sun, Brienne said. Clothes should be aired, so should courts. They hanged 2 men that day, and Brienne watched because the Lord Commander should watch. She did not like it, and did not pretend to. She did not write their names in the white book. That was not what the book was for. That night she lay down in the small cell she had taken for her own near the barracks, because she had found that the rooms in the tower made her feel like a child again, and she preferred not to feel that way. She slept for 2 hours, and woke to the sound of a moth's wings, or to a memory of them. The next weeks made a pattern. They pulled at threads and found that some led to knots and some to loose ends. Sir Hardwicke stood before her one morning and said, I have done enough of the king's filthy work, that if there is justice, it should have room in it for a man who keeps his hands only as dirty as they must be. She thought about that, and after he had gone, sat with Davos and Sam and argued until twilight. In the end they kept him, and set a man beside him to watch him, a watch for the watch. From the north a letter came with Sansa's careful words, and it said, "I heard what you do, and there is pride in the north for it, and do not forget to eat." And the girl you once saved at the inn, on the way to the Eyrie married, and named her daughter Brienne. Brienne read it twice and held the name in her mouth like bread she could not swallow for fear of losing the taste. In the south the ships came late, because the sea does not care for the wants of cities. Gendry went back to Storm's End and wrote to say that he was mending a gate, because there was no one else he trusted to do it. Bronn vanished into the Reach for a fortnight and came back with a story he would not tell, which ended with a sack of coin dropped on Tyrion's table and a line, "Your kin's face is intact for now." Camille kept her hall. She did it under Watchman's eyes and under Brienne's, and sometimes she came to the keep and spoke to Sam about the old guilds of the Masons, and how they once set the pay for men who climbed scaffolds. And sometimes she spoke to Davos about why Wintertown could feed itself without starving the Holdfast. She did not speak to Brienne about anything that mattered until one dusk, when the light lay flat on the city and made it look older than it had a right to be. "Do you think," she asked Brienne in the yard, "that you have made a thing that will last?" Brienne looked at her sword, and at the tower, and at a gull that had lost 2 feathers, and did not seem to care. "No," she said, "but I think I have made a thing that will keep another thing alive long enough to matter. The king is a boy and an old man in a tree. He looks at the city and sees roots. I look at the city and see stairs. A man can die on either. Me." Camille's smile came and went. "I could hurt you with very little effort," she said, almost cheerfully. "I could speak a word in the right ear, and a wrong man would put a drop of the right poison in your oil for your sword, and your grip would slip when you needed it not to. I could tell a baker that you take 2 loaves from his mouth when you visit, and he will believe me, because he is hungry. I could tell the watch you mock them, and they would spit in the street when you passed. You cannot hold that back with a sword." "No," Brienne said. She loosened her hand on Oathkeeper. "I can hold it back with men like Podrick, with posting the watch's pay, with telling the baker that I will stand in his shop at midday once a month, and weigh his bread because I know he is honest, and I want the city to know it too, with stepping into the street of silk in my white cloak, and not turning my head away, with writing truth in a book with ink that can be smudged and still read." Camille nodded, as if making a note in her head. "Then we are not enemies," she said. "We will never be friends, of course. You do not like me, and I have no compulsion to like you. But we have both learned what the city eats, and we will feed it different things. Let us see which taste it prefers." "No, it prefers whatever keeps it alive," Brienne said. "So do I." Winter came as it always does, not with a blizzard but with an edge that found the bones like an old debt. Men lit more fires. Women bought more cheap wine. The river went gray and tight at the edges. Hardwick came to Brienne one morning with a face that had lost some eel. "We broke a door," he said. "Behind it were 3 kegs I thought were wine. They were not wine. They were wildfire." "Nay." Brienne's stomach turned in a slow circle like a ship tacking. "Where?" "Beneath the fishmongers," he said. "There are more." She took Sam and Davos and a dozen men whose courage did not need testing, and they went under again. It had been years since the last green fire had taken the air and the prayers out of men in a single breath. Still, the memory of it did not loosen its teeth on the city. The kegs waited, patient as death, and on one someone had drawn a moth with a child's hand, and Brienne could not tell if it was an insult or a warning or a game. They carried them out carefully, like carrying bad news. "We did not bring them," Camille said later when Brienne stood in her hall with the moth pin burning in her palm. "We are not so foolish as to keep the one fire in the world that cannot be kept." "Then who?" "The ones who think they know how to clean a city," she said softly. "By burning it. The ones who do not love it enough to leave it messy. Your king will know their names when he looks long enough. I do not have eyes he has. I have ears. I have heard the word resurrection spoken in a cellar, by men who think they understand what it means to bring an order back. Brienne did not ask which order. Even the question had a stink. There are always men who dream of returning to what had fed them. She turned away. We will take the wildfire to the cellars below the tower, she said to Davos. We will pour it down the old well and pray it chooses to drown. Wildfire doesn't drown, Davos said, but can be contained. We used to keep worse things contained at sea with drums and prayer. We will try barrels and stones. Nah, they did, and the purge took on a new edge then. No longer lines on ledgers and weighed loaves, but the old clean fear of fire. Tyrion's jokes dried up, which was the surest weather vane they had that a storm was coming. Bran looked more like winter and less like a boy. Gendry sent more men. Sansa's letters came with sand in the fold, as if they had been written on a ledge in wind and sealed quickly. Camel closed her hall for 3 days, and when it opened again, the moths on the hems were gone, and Brienne thought that this was not surrender but prudence. One morning Hardwick came to them with blood on his hands and said, I found the man who set the kegs. He is dead. He tried to run past me on a stair and found a wall he did not think to find. He handed Brienne a scrap of cloth torn from the dead man's sleeve. Embroidered on it was a sun with a face. Dorn? Podrick said, startled. Why? Not Dorn, Sam said slowly, peering. Dornish, perhaps, but not their son. Look at the lips. He frowned. I have seen it in a book. An old order in King's Landing that used the sun as a sign because it had chapters in the south long ago. The Order of the Evening. He looked up. Old friends of the old queen, or of her septa. They hid in plain sight for a while. Resurrection, Brienne murmured. Men who love order always raise old corpses, Tyrion said. They like the company better. It agrees with them. They found the others in a cellar under the hall of the Guild of Chandlers, which was either a joke or a horror, given the wildfire. They found prayer books and no prayers, and a list of names, and near the names, dashes where some should be, as if holiness could be kept in accounts. It took 3 days and 4 nights to pull them all out, and in that time a baker was killed on Millsworth, and a boy named Tom was beaten and robbed of 2 coppers. Brienne sat on the step outside the White Sword Tower and thought that justice and mercy both were more tiring than war. In the end, the purge did not end. It settled. The court stood different. The king's face without holes, the watch with a payday that came nearer to the day printed on the paper. A woman in red who was watched and who watched and who watched, and whose moths were stitched inside rather than at the hem. Bronn complained less when coin went where it ought so long as some of it went also where he wished it to. Davos taught the river to carry more than hunger. Sam wrote new words on old rules, and smiled like a man who knows he will be mocked, but writes anyway. Tyrion learned to put his cup down and pick up a loaf when it was the wiser thing, and he teased the king into speaking when silence had become bearable only because it was familiar. On a spring morning that had the temerity to be flowered and clean, Brienne walked to the ruins of the sept and set a small thing on the stone where the silent sister had died. It was a moth pin. She had held it long enough. The sisters took no notice of it, and that was as it should be. She went from there to the cellars and checked the barrels of oil men had placed to drown a fire that would not drown. She went from there to the long hall where the watch collected their pay and stood with the men in the smell of sweat and leather and bread bequeathed by the baker who had learned to weigh flour without fear. Men who had once spat politely when she passed nodded now. It was not love. Love is a luxury in a city like this. But it was Trust's small, stubborn cousin. In that afternoon's light, she sat before the white book and took up her quill. Ink bled. She did not mind. She wrote her day in a line. Set a watch captain to his post in justice, weighed bread, removed wildfire to hold fast, received Gendry's men, and saw to the quieting of a riot without a head crack. She let the sentence go on without proper commas because the city did not pause. Then she turned to a page that had Jaime Lannister's name on it, and did not touch it, and then to one that had hers, and wrote nothing there because that, too, was as it should be. A knight does not chronicle her own worth beyond the work she has done. "Sir," Podrick said in the doorway, careful as ever not to look at the book. He had grown in the white, the way a tree grows around nails it cannot remove. "There's a boy here to see you. Says you told him to tell you when he saw a moth." "Tom," she said, and put down her quill. He was taller than she remembered and thinner, but the eyes were the same. Bright, ready, frightened of all the right things, and too few of the wrong. He held up his hand. On his palm lay a pearl with the dull sheen of a thing that has been handled by too many dirty fingers. "Where?" she asked. He pointed with his chin. Boys in his quarter always pointed with their chins, because hands were for holding on to what you had. "On the door of the Guild of Candlemakers," he said. "A moth like the one you gave the sisters, only carved." "Camel," Podrick said. "Or a mocker," Brienne said. She closed the book on glossing ink and rose, the white cloak settling on her shoulders as if it had always been meant to sit there. And perhaps it had. You do not know the shape of your life's armor until you have taken too many blows to count. Then one day you look down and find that your duties have fitted themselves, piece by piece, around your skin. They went out into a city that had been cleaned and was not clean, into a court that had been purged and would never be pure. The wind brought the smell of the sea and the smoke of 10,000 fires cooking 10,000 stews, the sum of which was called a realm. The street under their boots remembered everything and pretended not to. The bells of Baelor's broken dome made no sound. The white cloak moved and men looked. Some of them smiled, some did not. That was the coin she would spend every day and never have enough of. She was Brienne of Tarth. She was a knight. She was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard in a kingdom learning to breathe with a new set of ribs. She set her hand on the hilt of Oathkeeper, the way a woman might set her hand on the back of a chair when she is about to sit in it, and said, "To no one and to the whole city, come then." The Guild of Candlemakers had a door with a moth carved into it, and 3 old men within who loved bees like sons. There were ledgers that smelt of wax and honest math. There was a hidden nook in the wall where someone had hid a roll of parchment with a list of names that turned out to be children who would receive candles at the temple on their name day. She stood in the doorway and laughed once, quietly, and felt Podrick's curious glance on her cheek. "Not every moth is a message," she said. "Some are only moths." "So we are done?" Podrick asked and caught himself at once. "Not done. You know what I mean." She did. She shook her head. "Courts rot like cloth. You keep them clean by wearing them, by washing them, by hanging them in the air. You never finish the work. You only do it." No. He nodded and looked as if he were seeing something large for the first time and learning not to be afraid of it. They walked back through streets that smelled of spring and old fires. In the yard they met Sir Hardwick, who had dirt on his boots and a face that was less eel than it used to be. "Pay is posted," he said. "Men like it. They grumble because grumbling is half their breath, but they show up. Fewer fights, fewer knives. The baker sent a loaf with raisins. Said it was to make friends. I told him friends are dearer than raisins." He laughed. And he. Arain, Kabiken, Ka. "In time," Brienne said. "If you do not give me cause to hang you along with your peel." He looked at her with an ease he had been borrowing in recent weeks, and seemed to find at last. "I have learned which ropes I prefer," he said. "The ones that tie sacks, the ones that pull men from wells." "Good," she said. Dusk came, and the red keep glowed the way an old man's skin glows when a fire is lit. The king took his evening bread without incident. Tyrion made a bad joke about moths and took satisfaction in it. Bronn counted coins with the greedy innocence of a boy who had never been allowed to hold them before and had never learned the knack of pretending to despise what he craved. Sam read to the court from a reformed code for the watch and stumbled only twice, by his own count, and 3 times by bronze. Davos fell asleep in his chair for a blink and woke, embarrassed, and no one was unkind. In her cell, Brienne unlaced her breastplate and set Oathkeeper down, and carefully folded her cloak as if it were a map. She sat on the pallet and thought about the girl in the north named for her, and about the boy with 2 coppers, and the baker's peel that hung now like a sign of honest fear, and about Jaime's last smile, and about a woman in red who had learned not to wear moths where the sun could see them. She thought about quartz and cloth and the seas that beat at stone and never weary and cannot drown wildfire but can teach men to float long enough to be rescued. She blew out the candle and lay with her eyes open in the dark that belonged to any hall at any hour. She listened as the city's breath evened. Somewhere below, a rat catcher went into a hole and did not return for a time because there was work to be done there. Somewhere above, a gull laughed. Somewhere between the two, a white cloak hung, clean enough to wear tomorrow, and a ledger lay open to a page where the words were honest and the numbers added up. For now. When sleep took her, it took her like a wave that had been waiting for the right tide. When morning came, it came the way mornings do, without asking permission and with no apology for being the same as yesterday. She rose and set the white on her shoulders and went to meet it. The bells rang for the first bread and for the second, and then they rang for a boy's name day, because some moths are only moths, and some candles are only candles, and that, in this city, was as precious as a victory. And when the door to the hall opened to admit a whisper of cold and a whiff of the sea, she turned her head just enough to hear the words the messenger thought he had kept to himself. "Sir," he murmured, "there's trouble by the river." He swallowed. "It's not much." "It is always much," Brienne said, standing. "We will see to it." She buckled her sword and felt the weight of it like comfort. She stepped out into the corridor and the white cloak kissed her calves and then fell still. In that moment, the city and the keep and the sea and the memory of a night in a tub became one thing, a thing that could be kept if not forever, then long enough to matter. She put one hand on the stone, as if to feel its old hum, and then she went where she was needed. Because that was all the purge had ever meant. Not fire, not blood, but hands kept clean enough to pull others out of filth, and strong enough to do it every day the city asked.